When it comes to color grading, every project has its own unique challenges, and the way that you approach those challenges is going to be slightly different every single time. But once you've worked through enough projects, you start to develop a handful of different ways to cover your bases, no matter what gets thrown at you. Recently, I was asked to color grade a project for a wonderful organization called Sewn for Good. They create short films for nonprofit organizations that are doing great things in the world. The filmmakers involved in the process donate their time and help spread the word about what these nonprofits are doing. The film that I was a part of was about a community in the Philippines coming together around a love of tennis, and the organization called One Love Tennis that helped them to take it to the next level by building them a proper hard court to train on. There's a link down in the description if you want to watch the whole film, and I definitely recommend it. But what I want to do in this video is take you step by step through the process of how I approached the color grade for this film in Davinci Resolve, including the initial plan for the color grade, setting up the project properly and using groups to create a cohesive look, as well as making sure that my shots are matching and the finishing touches for the project. I'm going to do my best to include a lot of information for people of all skill levels, but if I do skip over anything that you want to know, please leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to help. With that being said, this one is going to be a big one, so secure the cup and let's dive in. All right, so before I ever even touched Davinci Resolve, before I ever even got any footage, one of the most important parts of the process was having a conversation with the filmmakers, with the director and with the team that was involved, and making sure that we were all on the same page. So we had a conversation. I gave them kind of my idea after seeing a rough cut of what I thought I could do with this film, the kind of mood and the tone that I wanted for it, made sure that was on the same page as them. And then also I was sent some references, some films that the director liked the way the color grading looked and thought that I could pull inspiration from. So we were all kind of on the same page. We all knew what was going on and we all agreed how we were going to move forward. That was the first thing that happened, and then I got the footage. Now, when I'm dealing with my own footage that I shot on my cameras, I have all of the original files, and I probably edited that as well in Davinci Resolve, and so I can see all the individual clips. In this case, we decided that the easiest way to get me the footage after it was edited was to send me a single file, a single ProRes HQ 10-bit file that had no effects on it, it had no color grading on it, and it was in the original log that the footage was shot in. But what that means is that I then have to import that file and cut it all up to individually address all of those clips. Okay, so we've got a blank canvas here, a new Davinci Resolve project. The only thing that I've really done here is imported the footage that I got from the director. So the one on the left here is the ProRes version. So that is the one that I'm going to be working on that's gotten rid of all the effects and it's starting from scratch. The one on the right is a rough cut to make sure that they both line up. They were exported correctly so that we're not going to run into any issues when I send back the file. So typically what I'll do is I'll go to my timelines, I will right click and hit timeline, create new timeline, and then I'll give it a name. Let's uncheck use project settings just so I can show you what my project settings are. Normally I would leave this as 3840 by 2160, but in this case, my footage is actually different here. So I want to go in and see, there it is. So it's 2880 by 1440. So I'm just going to go in 2880 by 1440. We're at 23.976. And then what's most important here is probably going over to color. Now there are a bunch of different ways that you can set up your color for every project and for every timeline, but this is the way that I like to do it. So under color science, I'm choosing Davinci YRGB. I'm not doing color managed. And then under timeline color space, I want to be grading in Davinci Wide Gamut and Davinci Intermediate. And then my output color space is Rec 709A. If we were to use the separate color space and gamma, it will show you what those are between the color space and gamma here, but they are the way that I like them. I have a whole video on why I use Rec 709A, but the short version of that video is basically to mitigate any issues with things looking different in Davinci Resolve, and then when I export them and watching them back either in QuickTime or in YouTube, there's this problem where there's a gamma shift and it kind of fades your image. This seems to solve that for me, and it's been working great for me for the last couple of years. So now that we've got that set up, I'm going to hit create. I'm gonna go grab my footage and drag it onto the timeline. So now we can see this is all in log, and it's all one big chunk, so now I'm gonna have to cut it up. Luckily, Davinci Resolve has a way to do this automatically. If you go to timeline and you go detect scene cuts, it's gonna scroll through and find anywhere where it thinks there's a scene cut, and it's going to make a cut there. So as you can see, it's gone in and made a whole bunch of different cuts. And the next step for me is actually to go through and just double check, watch the cuts and make sure that it did a good job. I won't bore you with that whole process, but you just kind of painstakingly go through and make sure that it worked correctly. And like I said, we've also got a version of the film that has all the effects and has the titles and stuff on it, so we can lay that on top and make sure that it all lines up correctly. Now, I already know that these worked, but this would be how you could check and make sure that everything was working correctly. So in this case, I'm just gonna get rid of that. The next step in my process was actually to kind of organize the files because there are a couple of different cameras used on this project. The primary camera was an FX3, a Sony FX3, and shot in S-Log3, but there was also a DJI drone that was shot in D-Log, and there was also some archival footage that was just from phones and stuff. So what I wanna do is actually go through every single clip and color code it. There were also a couple of places where there's just like black frames. And so what I would do is go in and give that a color too. So I call that chocolate. And then anything that was an FX3 shot, I'd go in and color it green, which luckily was most of it. So I can pretty much just highlight all of this, color it green, and then go in and find the ones that aren't FX3 shots. So there's a black frame there. So this is a drone clip here, so I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna choose to make it pink. And then just to make my life easier, because I don't actually need the audio cut up like this, I'm gonna delete most of the audio. So all I did was held Option to select it without selecting any of the videos, and then dragged box over it, so it selected all those clips. And then I'm going to right click here and hit link clip so that it unlinks it, and then just drag this audio track out to the end. Now I've got one solid audio track underneath there instead of a bunch of different clips that I don't really need. So now when we look at the timeline, we've got a fairly obvious visual representation of what we're working with here. So like you can see, all of the green is Sony FX3 footage. Any of the brown is going to be just black frames, so that's just audio only. And then we've got pink, which is our drone shots. And then we've got orange, which is archival footage. But here's the thing, this isn't just for the timeline. This actually helps me to grade faster. So check this out. If we go over to the color page, I can now go up to my clips, and there's a little drop-down menu, and I'm gonna go create smart filter. Then I'm gonna name the smart filter, so let's call it FX3 V2 because I've already got the FX3 from the original grade. Then we're gonna set the properties under color timeline properties. We're gonna go to clip color, and we're going to choose for the FX3, it was green. Oh, that's the wrong green. That green, there we go. And I'm gonna hit create. So now all we're seeing in the clips here are just the FX3 footage. It's filtered out all the other ones. And I have the same thing done for the drone and the same thing done for the iPhone footage. So if I select those, that's all I'll see on the timeline. Same thing with the drone footage as well. But the next step that I want to take with this kind of grouping of things together is actually to add it into a color grading group. So right now you'll see up in our nodes area here that we've got the option to choose either clip, so we're grading on the clip, or we're grading the entire timeline. But what happens if we highlight one of the clips, hit Command A or Control A to select all of the clips, and then what I'm going to do is right click, I'm going to go add into a new group, and I'm going to call this FX3 footage. Now when I hit OK, you'll see that there are 2 more dots that have come up here. So now we've got a group pre-clip and we've got a group post-clip, as well as our normal clip and timeline. Now I'm gonna go and do the same thing with my iPhone footage. So all of this, I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna hit add into new group. I'm gonna go iPhone footage. I'm gonna do the same thing for the drone footage. We're gonna add into a new group. And there we go. So we've got our nice groups all set up. So now I can go to my clips and go back to all clips. Also, just an aside, if you don't want to set up smart groups like I did, like these smart filters, you can just go to clip color and literally just get the FX3s. If you have it memorized, if you already know which clip is which color and that kind of stuff, you can just do it by color up in here. Lots of different ways to organize. And so now you can see the little link down in the bottom corner of each of these clips. That's anytime that I'm highlighted on a clip that's in a group with other clips, it'll show you that it's in the group with those clips. So let's see if I find some drone footage. So if I click this, you notice that the little link went away on all the FX3 footage. But if we scroll back far enough, we should see there's another drone shot there, so it's got the link because I'm still selected on that drone shot, and so on and so forth. So it's a nice way to organize things together, but also it's a nice way to grade things together. Now, that may have seemed like a lot of work before I ever even start color grading, but let me tell you, that kind of organization saves me a ton of time when it actually comes to the color grade, not only because it's easier to find things, but because I can grade things together. I can create a look on the whole group, and that's what we're gonna do in a second here. And so that just saves me so much time. It makes it 100 times easier once it actually comes down to the actual work of doing the color grade. So with that being said, let's actually dive in and do some grading. So the first thing I want to do is find kind of a hero shot, one that I think is a really nice looking shot that has a bunch of different colors in it, that kind of can be a representative of a good starting place for the whole project. And there's one shot in here that I really loved, and so that's where I started. So this one right here. So we've got some nice bright areas, some nice dark areas. We've got colors in here. We've got the blue shirt, the green trees in the background. We've got the red on the hat. So we've got kind of a nice wide range of things in this shot. So this is a good starting place for us to do our color grade. So the very first thing that we want to do is get our nodes set up kind of how we think we're going to want them. So if you're not familiar with nodes, they're kind of like layers. They happen one after the other, kind of on top of each other. So for example, if I wanted to add another node after this one here, I'm going to right click and hit add node, add serial, and it'll add a node in order. Now anything that I do here in this first node, for example, if I go in and I make it very blue, that is going to feed into the second node. Now, anything that I do in the second node, if I make it really orange, it's not doing that back to the first node. That's only happening at this point. So they're very much one after the other, and that is something to kind of keep in mind in terms of our process. So you can see our input at the start, it goes into the first node. We do whatever we do on the first node, that sends into the second node. We do whatever we do there, and then this is the output. So the very first thing that I like to do is just put this footage in a place where I can actually see what's going on here. Right now we're looking at Sony FX3 S-Log3 footage, and I just need to correct that into a color space that is normal so I can see all the colors and the normal contrast. And if you're not familiar with S-Log and log footage, I do have another video on that. I'm not going to do a super deep dive into it right here, but you'll definitely see what I'm talking about in a second. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a plugin called Cinematch, and I'm going to put it on this first node. Now, Cinematch is a third-party plugin that you can purchase. It doesn't come with Davinci Resolve, but I'll show you how you can do it without having to purchase this plugin as well. But just so you can see how I do it, first I go to choose camera source profile. I choose Sony, I choose my camera, so FX3, I choose the color space and gamma that it was shot in, And previously, I used to always use this to apply a Rec. 709 color transform, but what I'm gonna do here is choose the output space as Davinci wide gamut. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the S-Log3 footage and I'm converting it into a Davinci wide gamut color space. Now, this isn't because Davinci wide gamut is better than S-Log or anything like that, but it's a nice common space that I can work with, and Blackmagic Design, Davinci Resolve, all the tools work really well in Davinci wide gamut. So this way, I'm going to convert both the FX3 footage and the drone footage into Davinci wide gamut, and then I should be able to use common tools amongst both of those because I've kind of started with that step where I put them into a common space. The next thing that we're gonna do is go into the group post clip. So up at the top here, we've got these 4 dots. Like I said, we've got the clip, and then we've got group post clip. Now this is important. The name kind of says it all. Group post clip means that we're doing everything after the nodes in the clip portion. So this is happening after this output. So we've got whatever nodes we put in our clip node tree, and then it's going to the group post clip. But this is happening to all of the clips that are in this group. So they're all going through this process afterwards. So anything that we want to do to all of our clips in that group, we're gonna do in here. So what I'm gonna do is grab a color space transform, and I'm gonna drag it on this node in our group post clip, and I'm going to change the input color space to Davinci wide gamut and the input gamma to Davinci intermediate. So that's what we're going from. And then we're going output color space, Rec. 709, output gamma, Rec. 709A. So now you can see that we've converted our log footage that looked super desaturated and flat, and we've converted it into a way where it looks, normal. Now going back to the clip level, so now I'm back just editing this single clip, I want to talk about Cinematch for a second and show you the other way that you can do it as well. So one of the reasons that I like Cinematch is because it actually matches camera sensors, not just the camera profile, not just S-Log3 on any camera. They've actually gone in and looked at the FX3 sensor and analyzed it and made any differences between that and other Sony cameras. They've built that in here. But the other reason that I like it is because it's got exposure and temperature and tint controls built into the plugin, as well as these false colors. So let's say, for example, I wanted to turn on the false colors, go to skin tones. Let's say I want to bring his skin tones up a little bit so that they're where Cinematch thinks that skin tone should be. So now I've got a better exposure than I did to start with. It's just kind of like a quick, easy way to start with. I can move all this later if I want to. And then it's the same thing for white balance. If you've got something black, white, or gray in the shot, you can use the false colors to then do your white balance. So for example, this shot's a little bit better for that because it's got that white line in it. So I can do the false balance white colors. When I'm set on temperature, it's gonna show me things orange and blue. So you can see that on the white line, it's way too blue right now. So I'm gonna move it over until it's no longer blue, but before it turns orange. So something like that. And then if I go to the tint, it'll show me where things are too green or too magenta. There's a little bit of green on that line. So I'm gonna move it over towards magenta, just to get rid of that, but before it turns magenta. So I want to find somewhere in the middle like that. And now I've got a good white balance on this image. It's a little trickier to do on this one because there's really nothing in here that's gray, black, or white, like a true gray, black, or white. So I think for now, I'm actually just going to kind of eyeball this a little bit. And I'm looking down at my scopes here, so I'm going to try and get those skin tones on the line as best as I can. So we've got our skin tones right on the line, and that's one of the reasons why I like to use Cinematch. There are a bunch of other tools in there as well, but those are kind of the main ones that I really like. The way that you can do this if you don't want to buy Cinematch is if we use a color space transform. So the same way that we used a color space transform on our group post clip here. So this would be like our CST out. So we're going from Davinci wide gamut to Rec. 709. All we need to do is go from our Sony S-Log3, S-Gamut 3 Cine, like that, to Davinci wide gamut, Davinci intermediate. And it's basically doing the same thing. And now I can make another node after that. And if I want to let's say, go into my HDR panel, and I can use my temperature and my tint to achieve a very similar thing to what I did with Cinematch. Let's label these really quick. So we've got CST in, then I've got white balance. And actually, if I wanted to add another node after the CST in, again, I can either go add node from here, or I can hit Option S or Alt S if you're on a PC. I'm gonna call this one exposure. And I'm just gonna go into my HDR panel again here and bring up the exposure a little bit. So now we've got pretty much the same thing that we did with Cinematch, but just spread over 3 nodes instead of all in that one. I just find I like Cinematch for a couple of reasons. It's totally up to you to do it whatever way you want. Okay, so I've put it back to the Cinematch version because that's how I did the rest of the project as well. But the next step that we're gonna take is actually to take this as our kind of hero shot and create our look based around what's going on in this shot. And for that, we're actually gonna go back to the group post clip. So that means that we're going to be making our look going over all of the FX3 footage. Now, the catch here is that we want to be doing as much of the grade as we can in Davinci wide gamut, because that's a bigger color space than Rec. 709. So we actually want to do all the grading before this CST out, or at least most of it. So instead of using Option S to create a node after it, I'm actually gonna hit Shift S to create a node before that. And so what we're gonna do is kind of work backwards a little bit from our output color space transform to make sure that we're getting the most information during the color grading process. So what I like to do on this node is actually add any kind of a film look or any kind of a LUT that I might like to have on there. Now, there are some built-in film looks in Davinci Resolve. If we go to LUTs and go to film looks, they've got this 2383 LUT that they've got built into it. The problem with it is that it's kind of annoying to use because it's not built to be used in Davinci wide gamut. It's built to be used in Rec. 709 Cineon film log. So what I actually like to do, Cullen Kelly, who's a great colorist and great educator here on YouTube as well, has made a version of that that's built to be used in Davinci wide gamut. So all I do is I go and I grab the Davinci wide gamut to Davinci wide gamut 2383, and I drag it onto that node. And then we've got a bit of a film look. If we go down and we make sure that we're selected on the key tab, we can dial that back a little bit. So I like to pull it back to about a 0.6 in the key output. And then I'm just hitting Command D to disable and re-enable it to kind of see what I'm doing before and after. I quite like that for our kind of film look. I'm going to create another node before using Shift S. And I'm going to grab my curves. Going to go over to my custom curves, and I'm going to just grab just the Y curve here. What I'm going to do is pull in a little bit of this contrast. I'm going to choose the 3 dots and choose editable splines. So what I did to grab that contrast, there's a little arrow up here. It's going to bring in both my white point and my black point. Then as I click on that bottom point, you'll see because I chose editable splines up here, I'm going to get the ability to create a really smooth curve. So this is going to be kind of my like master contrast curve. I'm going to click here as well, and it's going to give me this spline. I'm just going to create a bit of an S curve. And at this point, I'm just kind of dialing this in to taste. Label my nodes so I know what they all are. So we've got contrast, the 2383. I'm going to make another node before this and call it color. For this, I'm going to use the new color slice tool. And actually, before I do that, I want to go back to my clip and I want to adjust my white balance a little bit because I feel like we've gone a little too warm on this clip. And here's where I can go into my color curves or my color slicer tool and update any of the colors that I want for my kind of look. So in this case, I feel like maybe we could get a little more density in the greens. So we're gonna go down here in the color slice tool We're gonna add some density into those greens. You can see it'll make it just a little bit darker. Okay, same thing in the yellows. I'm also just gonna desaturate the yellows and the greens just a little bit. I'm gonna take the reds and push them a little bit more towards orange. So you can see in his hat there, the red is like really kind of pinky, vibrant red. And what I want is just a little bit more of an orangey red. I find that Sony shoots reds really kind of pinky. So far these three nodes, if you exclude the CST out, we've got color, contrast, and our film look there. That's basically our look for the whole thing. I feel like maybe we could add a little bit more contrast, which I'm gonna do in the primaries color wheels using the contrast slider here. That's just gonna give us a little bit more pop as well, a little bit more saturation. And then I'm gonna use the pivot to shift it a little bit brighter. And let's take a look at that before the look and after the look. Now, there are two more things that I like to do in my group post clip as well, and I like to do them after my CST out. So the first one is that I like to fade up my blacks just a little bit to give it a little bit more of that kind of film look. And for some reason, if I do it in Davinci Wide Gamut, if I do it before my color space transform output, I find it just doesn't work the same. So all I'm gonna do is go into a node just after the CST out. I'm gonna go into my curves. I'm gonna go to my basic curve, and I'm gonna go to this low soft slider with my waveform up so I can see what's going on. And I'm just gonna slide that low soft slider up just a little bit. And you can see the black portions of the image just coming up just a hair. That's all I want. It's very, very subtle. If I go before and after, it's almost hard to notice. But it just brings up those blacks just a little bit. Then the other thing that I like to do is I like to add just a tiny little bit of grain. In this case, we didn't want it to have like a whole lot of visible film grain, but when we go to export this and we go to upload it to YouTube, what I find is that if there isn't a little bit of grain on there, we get a lot of banding when they compress the file to put it up. Whereas if there's a little bit of grain, you get a lot less banding. Now, pick your flavor, however you want to add grain in there. You can use the film look creator from Davinci Resolve. So that's in the effects tab up in the top right here. If you go show all, and then you just search for film look creator, there's grain in there. So you can go in and you can just turn everything else off if you want. And then there's grain options right here. So enable grain. There's also just a film grain plugin that you can add in there as well. In this case, I would choose something like 35 millimeter. I'm gonna zoom way in to make sure that I can see it. So you can see in this kind of green area here when I turn it off and turn it on. But when I zoom back out, I'm gonna hit Z or Z to zoom back out to normal. It's like not really a noticeable thing. It's just something that'll help a little bit if there were some gradients in the background or whatever and we got any banding. It would just help break those up a little bit. The way that I personally like to do it is with a third-party plugin again. Again, I don't want you to have to think you need to buy these things, but I happen to have it and I like the way that it works. So I'm going to use Film Convert Nitrate. I'm going to actually turn off the film settings, turn off the levels, make sure halation is turned off. Like I'm turning off everything except grain. I'm just using the grain in here. We're gonna go grain strength. I'm gonna dive in here again. In the background there, I'm gonna choose my grain size as 2. So I'm making it super small. I'm also gonna dial this back to about 60% grain. And then if we turn that off and on, you can see it in the like bokeh in the background here. It is adding that little bit of grain. but it's not super noticeable. And I just find that it works better after the CST out. If I put it before the CST out, then it's adding all the contrast and saturation that's necessary for the CST, but it's doing it to the grain, and I actually don't want that, so I like to add that one afterwards. And the only other thing that I like to do sometimes in my overall look is just before my CST out, so I'll hit Shift S to create a node just before that, I like to just desaturate my blacks. So what I'll do is I'll go into my curves and I'll go over to my luminance versus saturation. So this is taking like the light, so anything that's dark is over here, anything that's light is over on the right-hand side. And what I'm gonna do is click this little black dot down at the bottom, and I'm just gonna bring down the saturation of anything that's below this point. And it's on a curve, so you know, whatever this is here is only going to be coming down a tiny little bit. So if we hover and click, so that point, that black point just right there is right here. And it's only coming down a certain amount by 0.8. It says from 1, I think is the default. Yeah, so it's coming down by 20% at that point. So I'm not taking out all the color out of the dark areas or anything like that, but I am just kind of gradually bringing it down. Sometimes it's nice to drag this up a little bit. And if we go too far, you'll see it. So it'll start pulling the saturation out of parts that we don't want it pulling saturation out of. But I just find that this cleans up my blacks nicely if there is a clip where there is a bunch of color and saturation down in the dark areas for whatever reason. So, okay, that is our look. We basically picked a hero shot and we created a look that now is going to be applied across all of the other clips in our timeline, or at least right now it's applied to all the FX3 clips. So what I want to do next actually is make a still of this. So I'm going to create a new still album here. Just call it One Love. And I'm gonna right click and hit grab still. Now, because I'm selected on group post clip, when I grab a still, it's going to say post on it there. And if I right click and I hit display node graph, we're gonna see the node graph here for that group post clip point. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go to our drone footage. And because they're all in a group too, what I want to do is apply that same group post clip to that. Now, right now it looks wild because we haven't done the input color space transform. So what we're going to do is go to one of the clips. We're going to go to clip. We're going to grab Cinematch in this case. And I'm going to choose DJI Air 2S D-Log because that's how this was shot. And I'm going to choose the output color space of Davinci wide gamut. Now for now, I'm not gonna actually worry about fixing this because it looks a little dark and I would wanna do a couple of things with it. But what I do want to do is after that input color space transform, so we'll call that CST in, I'm going to create 1, 2, let's say 3 more nodes. I'm gonna call this exposure. I'm gonna call the next one, let's call it saturation or color, and then another one called contrast. Okay, so those we're gonna come back to in a bit, but what I just wanna have is all of those set up, and then I'm gonna click on my other 2 drone shots, and I'm going to middle click. If you don't have a middle click on your mouse, you can right click and hit apply grade from that first clip. And then what it's gonna do is bring everything over, those 4 nodes that we created, it's gonna bring those over to those other clips. So now they're kind of at the starting place. They all have the CST in, they have 3 nodes ready to go for changing them however they need to. We're pretty much set up and ready to start going. I'm gonna go back to my FX3 stuff and do the same thing. So because I already did a little bit of shifting on the CST in this one, I'm gonna do it on a different clip, but I'm gonna go Cinematch. I'm gonna choose Sony, FX3, S-Gamut 3 Cine, S-Log 3, output color space, Davinci wide gamut. I'm gonna create 3 more nodes. Call call it exposure if I need to do any more exposure stuff outside of Cinematch, or if you're using a regular CST in, if you're using like the color space transform plugin from Davinci Resolve, then you might need an extra exposure node. This one's called saturation/color, and then this one's called contrast. And then I'm going to highlight all of them by hitting Command or Control A, and I'm going to middle click on the one that has this on it, or right click and hit Apply Grade. It's going to ask me if I want to replace the existing grades. I'm okay with that. Let's replace them. And now everything has this on it. And so now this one even is back to its starting place. So none of the white balance is done again here. So now if I wanted to, I could also grab a still of this and just, let's label it FX3 start. So if for some reason I need to reset one of the clips back to its kind of starting point in the clip level, I can just do that by adding that still back on it. And the stills you apply the same way that I just showed you. So you can either middle click on it or you can right click and hit Apply Grade. So let's say I went in here and I did a bunch of things to this and I didn't like it in the end. I could be like, okay, you know what? I want to reset here. I'm going to go Apply Grade from that still. And now I'm back to kind of ground zero. Okay, so that was a huge part of the process. We've created the look that's basically going to go across our entire timeline, across our entire film. And now we just need to go in to each individual clip and make sure that they're balanced out and make sure that anything specific that needs to be done to the clips is done to the clips. And a lot of this is just going to be exposure and white balance. And because we've got this basic node structure with these 4 nodes here, so our CST in, our exposure, saturation and color and contrast, we've got a great starting place, and all we have to do is fiddle with those until it works with the look that we've already built. So at this point, I'm literally going to be going through each individual shot, going into my CST in this case, which is Cinematch, and I'm going to be setting my exposure, setting my white balance. And then I'm just going to move on for now. I'm just going to go get a very loose kind of look for this. Exposure. I actually kind of like this one a little bit more blue and a little bit darker. Part of what I'm going to do is be flipping back and forth to kind of just be not necessarily directly matching them. We'll get into that in a bit, but we'll be taking a look and seeing if we've got kind of a similar feeling between the clips. Now, for example, as we see shots that are shot in different locations or in different ways, or we want them to look differently from the previous clip. So for example, this is outside, kind of in the morning light. This one is an interior shot from the scene where this kid is sitting in his room with his tennis racket and he's putting the tape on it. We want to make sure that we are thinking about how these scenes are not only working together, but also how they're going to be separated. So I don't want this necessarily to look exactly like the outdoor scene because it's not outdoors. And if we're feeling good about a setting, for example, like this shot here where we've got the shovel kind of moving the dirt around, and I feel like that's probably something I can copy over to another clip where we've got, again, the dirt, just the feet on the ground. I can, again, middle click on the previous one while I have this one selected, and it'll pull those settings over. Now, in this case, we've got 2 shots back to back that look like they were basically part of the same shot or a very similar shot. So what we can do is once we get one of them done, once we get our white balance and our exposure set, we can go to the second one, middle click on the first one, and it'll apply the grade from that first one. So that's just a way to make things a little bit quicker. Or for example, here I've got the close-up version of the same shot from the long shot, so I can copy over the grade from that and then just tweak from there. Just little things that you can do to kind of speed up this initial, just trying to get a base level look across the board. If we copy again, And so my goal here is just to quickly repeat that process across every single clip in the timeline to make sure that I've just got a good starting point. Then I'm gonna go back and do another pass where we're gonna get a little bit more nitpicky. The next step of the process is really all of the little intricacies. So for example, on this shot here, so we've got our CST in that's doing most of the heavy lifting as well as the look, but then I added these 2 extra nodes down here at the bottom. The first one is literally just pulling down in our HDR panel on the highlight tab, pulling down the exposure of the highlights. And the reason for that is because I just wanted to get the sky with a little bit of that blue color up in the corner again. So if we turn that off and then turn it back on, it's just bringing down the exposure of the sky a little bit so that we get a little bit of that information back instead of blowing it all the way out. And then in this second node here, I'm just creating a little bit more contrast. So I've gone into my windows here. I've created a circular window around my subject. And then I've gone into my primaries and used the contrast to add a little bit of contrast into my subject there. And you can see it just makes the shine on the edge of his face and kind of his shoulder and stuff pop just a little bit more, so it draws your attention in towards the center. So these are the kinds of little intricate things that I'm gonna go through every single clip once I've got it all kind of figured out, and I'm going to create these kinds of shapes of light, or I'm going to do these little tweaks to my HDR panel to bring down the sky or those kinds of things. I'll show you a couple more examples here. So for example, on this one, I created a circular window in the middle that's basically just a vignette around the outside to draw your eye in towards the middle. And so that was done by creating that circular window and then inverting it. So if we highlight, so by hitting Shift H or by going up to this here, clicking on that, you can see the highlight. Everything that we can see that's not gray is what we're affecting. And so then I went to my gamma in my primaries and I just brought that down a little bit. You can see it's at minus 0.02. So before and after. Very, very subtle, but I just wanted to bring the eye into that center point. Same thing here. I've created a vignette around the outside. I do a lot of this kind of like drawing the eye in by making everything else a little bit darker, just shaping the light a little bit. Same thing here, so I've created a vignette around my character, around my subject, and then I've done an outside node. So the way that you do that, if you've created a window, then you hit Option O, and it'll do a node that's the opposite of whatever the previous one was. So in this case, the vignette part of it, I'm affecting everything except my subject. I'm making it all darker. And then on the outside node, which is actually on my subject, I'm just cranking up the contrast a little bit within the primaries. So I'm just making him pop a little bit more. You can see the contrast going into the shirt there. For this shot, I actually was trying to make it look like it was earlier in the morning than it was. So on my contrast node, what I've done is actually brought up the blacks a little bit and brought down some of the higher parts of this image. So you can see that the brightest part only goes up to here. So when I've got this dot here on my curve, I'm actually bringing down some of these brighter parts and reducing the contrast. Then on the next node, I've created another vignette around him so it looks darker in the background and it brings your eye up to our subject. And then on this last node here, which was actually notes from the director, I kind of enhanced that even further. So you can see I pulled down the white points. I'm taking away more of that contrast that comes in when there's more light to happen. So it's making it look a little bit more like it's earlier in the morning. I've also cooled off his skin tones a little bit. And then in my HDR panel here, I'm bringing down the entire exposure of the entire image as well. So again, it looks a little bit earlier in the morning than it actually was so that it matches the clips before it. So we've got all these clips that are happening in the morning. We've got the water, we've got the trees, we've got him coming out of his house. And then what I wanted to do is make that match all of those clips a little bit better. Similar to that other shot, I'm just bringing down the highlights in the sky again so we get the texture in the clouds. We've got this nice silhouette shot, and then I'm also bringing up a little bit of the shadows so you can just see the outline of him a little bit better. And that's really what I'm going in and doing on all of these clips. I'm just reshaping the light. Most of it is just using different kinds of windows to push light in where I want a little bit more or pull light out where I don't want it. I'm using a lot of just making a window and pushing in some gamma or some exposure in the HDR panel if I want to. Just really simple little touches that make a big difference. So you can see on this one before and after. So I've pulled down some of the highlights and the detail in the back, and I've shaped the light so it pushes your eye towards the subject that you're supposed to be looking at. Same thing here. And once again, I'm not going to bore you by going through every single clip. There is a little bit of something on most of these clips, some kind of light shaping or some kind of specific thing for each clip, but they're all very subtle, they're all very small, and they're just serving the greater look, everything that we're doing to try and get a cohesive look. And speaking of that cohesive look, one of the ways that I make sure that I've got that going on, that my clips are matching, is by using this button up here in the top. That's the split screen button. And if you go under the drop down menu and choose selected clips, now I can choose a bunch of clips by command clicking or shift clicking if they're all in a row. And you can just kind of see and make sure that everything in that scene all has a cohesive look. If you get too many of them, it starts to be a little hard to see. But like that scene, I want it to be a little bit warmer. It's not like super warm, but they've got this nice light coming through these blinds. So we've got a bit more of a kind of yellowy indoor look. Same thing with the intro scene. So if I click on a couple of those, oh, not that one. There we go. So we can see that we've got a fairly cohesive kind of look throughout all of these. We've got a nice match to all of our contrast levels, and this is a great way to check that. Same thing of this scene with the kid in their bedroom. We've got all the kids near the end, looking all happy. Make sure that that's all got the same kind of vibe. And then of course, once I've gone through this whole process and I'm feeling really great about it, I make an export and I send it over to the director to make notes on it. And he came back with some pretty minimal notes. A lot of it had to do with the greens looking a little too yellow. So I went in some of the shots. I just played around a little bit with my curves here to push the greens a little bit back towards green. And so then I would kind of go back through and make sure that I don't have that problem anywhere else. This was an interesting one. I wanted to fix the greens in the trees, but then it made the tennis balls way too green. So you can see I'm fixing the green in the trees so it's not quite so yellow, but then my tennis balls become super green. So I actually needed to create a couple of windows. So you can see the power windows that I've created around the tennis balls. And I pushed that color of the tennis balls back towards yellow, but only in those areas. So there's a lot of back and forth where you go through a pass, you do one thing, you go through another pass, you do another thing, and then eventually it all adds up so that you've got this one big cohesive piece of art. In this specific case, that was it. There were no more notes at that point, and that became the final film. So as a quick summary of kind of the outline of what we've done here, we did our import, we made Davinci Resolve cut it all into individual pieces. Then we categorized and grouped things together so that we can use both the clip level, but also the group level grading. Then we created a look. Then we went through everything and we did our basic exposure and contrast on each clip. Then we would go back through every single clip and do any of the kind of minutia, all the little details and stuff that needed to be done on a clip by clip basis to really bring all those clips to life and to draw your eye where it needed to be drawn. Then of course we've got rounds of feedback, however many need to go back and forth. and then we're done. Then we've got our final film. So I know that was a lot, but if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to help out if I can, or maybe even make a video about what you ask in the future. Thank you to Sewn for Good for having me as a part of this project. Again, there's a link down in the description if you want to go check out the film, and I highly recommend that you do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.